Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I am happy to be with you to talk about some of the books that I have been listening to recently. The first two are from Audible Originals, and no, I'm not being asked or paid to talk about Audible Originals, but I have been enjoying them. Those are the two free books that you get, or two free selections that you get a month. They're often more novella length than novel length, but it's introduced me to a few authors that I hadn't known before and some really fun books. They're often full cast performances and often more like old-time radio performances than your regular audiobook. So I've really been enjoying a lot of those, and I'm going to talk about two of them today. We are talking about, by the title of this episode, you see that it's Other Known Troublemakers, which is part of the title of the first book that we are going to talk about, but I think there are troublemakers in each of the books that we'll be discussing today. And as I said at the end of the last episode, these are books geared more toward middle grade readers, I would say. Maybe some give or take in there, but you know your reading habits or your child's reading habits, and you would be able to tell. At any rate, the first book, Audible Original, no, it is a book as well, is called Riley Mack and Other Known Troublemakers. It is by Chris Grabenstein, and I enjoy his writing. I've read a couple other things by Chris, and so I thought this looked fun, and the description of the book is great. What do you get when you add up one middle school bully, 2 bank robbers, 57 dogs in peril, 4,000 missing dollars, and 5 daring troublemakers led by the one and only Riley Mack? Well, you get one crazy caper. In this merry, mischievous romp, storyteller Chris Grabenstein introduces Riley Mack, a 12-year-old hometown hero you'll never forget. So the main character is, as it says, 12-year-old Riley Mack and his gang of you could call them troublemakers. You could call them an elite team of caper pulling. I don't even know. I lost myself halfway through that sentence. They the characters in this, there's several friends of Riley's that are around the same, well, they are the same age. They're in the 7th grade, I believe. And then they add one more kid to their gang, if you want to call it that, from the beginning of the story. So let me just start you off. So Riley Mack is 12. He is a known troublemaker, supposedly, only because the sheriff has taken a dislike to him after he shoplifted an ice cream cake by stuffing it down his pants. There were reasons behind that act. He went back and paid for it. So Riley's dad is in the military. He has been deployed. He's been gone for a long time. He wasn't around for Riley's birthday. Riley acted out in an inappropriate way by stuffing an ice cream cake down his pants. He was younger at that point. I can't remember which birthday it was, but so the sheriff has taken a dislike to him. The sheriff isn't a terribly nice man anyway, and his son is Riley's arch nemesis and one of the bullies in town. And that is where we find Riley. He is sitting with his friends. They get a you could call it a 911 kind of thing. They get a call out that there is a 6th grader being bullied at the convenience store, and they go into this whole huge, he's being bullied by the sheriff's son. So, of course, they can't, do the normal route of how you would report a bully. And so they go into this whole caper of that's planned with communications, and the one girl in the group, she does all the voices, and she loves to do the like when they pretend like they're calling dispatch, then she is the dispatch operator, and she plays all of these different roles. And it's one of those capers where everything is planned. And so that's how you meet Riley and his gang. And then the kid that they rescue decides that he too needs to be in this gang. And I love this kid because he reads the dictionary, and so he's always thrown in words, and then he always refers to everybody by their first and last names. So he always says things like, blah, blah, blah. Do you know what that word means, Riley Mack? And then he explains it. So there's some really good vocab lessons in this book. Riley and his gang of known troublemakers. They're kind of troublemakers, but their hearts are in the right places. And there's more than one caper going on here. So from that description, you hear 2 bank robbers, a middle school bully. There are 57 dogs in peril. So there's a plot to rob the bank. There's a plot to frame Riley's mother for something that happens at the bank that's completely unrelated to the robbing of the bank. There's some dogs who are in a not so great situation. There's just a lot going on here, and Riley, as the 12-year-old, is doing his best to not only solve a bunch of mysteries, but also put them right without having to go to the sheriff, because the sheriff is not so great. The book originally came out in hardcover April 10th, 2012, so it has been around for a while. If Riley was a real person, he would no longer be 12. He'd be 19 now. That's just weird to contemplate. There is a second Riley Mack book, and that is called, give me one second, Riley Mack Stirs Up More Trouble. I have not yet read that one, but if it's anything like the first one, it's probably pretty entertaining. That one came out in 2013. So there are at least 2 of these. And I think that Chris Grabenstein writes some really fun middle grade books that are, they're funny, they are fun, they're usually kind of wacky and zany in some ways, but they're always also about, friendship and loyalty and standing up for what's right and figuring out how to deal with problems, whether those problems are with your friends at school or with bullies or with, communicating with your parents or a parent who's absent, etc., etc. He has written another series of books, the Jackie Haha books, which I've talked about on here as well. He co-writes those with James Patterson, it goes by Jimmy Patterson when he writes books for younger readers as opposed to his adult novels. So this book was a lot of fun to listen to. I would imagine it's a lot of fun to read, but in terms of listening to it, it does have a full cast. It's a full ensemble cast. So each voice is done by someone different. I'm sure there's people who do many voices, as often is the case, but it's very easy to tell, of course, who is speaking because each character is narrated or acted by a different person, and it's very well done. It's not quite as maybe like old time radio. I can't remember. I'm trying to think if there were sound effects. Yes, there were some sound effects, but not quite to the extent of some other books that I've listened to that have, if somebody knocks on the door, you've got the knocking, but there were sound effects. There was opera at one point playing, and it was pertinent to the plot, but it was, so they did have a few sound effects, and like the dogs barking. So I shouldn't say that there were sound effects. I just gave you false information. Please forgive me for giving you that false information. Things sometimes get mixed up in my head when it's been an hour or 2 since I've read something or listened to something. It's been longer than that. At any rate, I would recommend this book if you have a middle grade reader who enjoys capers, who enjoys mysteries, who enjoys books about, groups of friends who figure things out and go put themselves out there to, solve mysteries and help their friends and fellow classmates, etc. We are going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about frenemies. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Always on the go, but the day just won't be one without your Hollywood fix. Let Golden State Media Concepts Entertainment Podcast take care of that. An all-inclusive look of pop culture.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. We are talking about books or audiobooks geared toward middle grade readers today. And as I said before the break, this next one is about frenemies. Frenemies is in the title. It is called Rivals! Frenemies Who Changed the World. And it is, again, an Audible original. It is an audiobook. And it is about, well, as you can see, frenemies who changed the world. So it's about rivalries that have had an impact on the world. So this one is nonfiction with some liberties taken. So, for instance, Mary, Queen of Scots. There is a section on Mary, Queen of Scots and I just blanked. Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth, and their rivalry. And Mary, Queen of Scots, for some unknown reason, talks like a Valley girl. So that's a little weird. This is another ensemble cast, although there is a lot more narration. But then when they're talking about the characters in these rivalries, then there is narration. So here is the description. It is exclusively on Audible, and it says it's history for ages 8 and up. So a little younger than middle grade, but I think middle grade readers might enjoy it as well. Did you know that most of our dinosaur fossils were discovered because 2 grown men absolutely hated each other? It's true. Rivals, Frenemies Who Changed the World, is a riotous audio exclusive, like if Monty Python taught your history class. Each volume of 4 30-minute histories will dig into the petty name-calling and grumbling grudges that led to many of the world's greatest advancements, all delivered with a cheeky sense of humor. Choose sides. Cope or Marsh, the jerks who discovered so many dinosaurs. Hamilton or Burr, whose rivalry fueled American politics. Queen Elizabeth and Mary, Queen of Scots, who fought to rule England. Adidas and Puma, whose rivalry changed the world of sports and fashion. Kidnappings, rock fights, duels, and explosions. Rivals shows world leaders at their absolute best and their worst, often at the same time. So that cheeky aspect of it, for instance, when something dramatic happens and the narrator puts on his dramatic voice, there's often the sound of an explosion in the background, and then the narrator will say, "Really? Did we really need an explosion right there?" There's, I think, maybe only one point when the explosion sound effect is actually appropriate. Maybe there's a couple of points, but there's often explosions, and they are not terribly necessary, but they're funny. Again, there are some liberties taken. Mary Queen of Scots talks like a Valley girl, which for a very highly educated woman who spoke at least 2 languages fluently, she probably didn't, not probably, of course she didn't sound like that, but yeah. So there are 4 rivalries here, as you heard. The first one is Cope and Marsh, the anthropologist who discovered a lot of the dinosaurs, and the standards weren't quite so high in terms of scientific discoveries when they were doing this, so they were just naming things willy-nilly, finding the same things. They were literally stealing bones from each other, just crazy stuff. I hadn't known the extent of that rivalry. Most people know that Hamilton and Burr were rivals, but this goes into a lot of why and what happened. Of course, Queen Elizabeth and Mary, Queen of Scots, who each claimed to be the heir of the throne of England, and how that all worked. And the fascinating part that they never met, which I had forgotten. I knew that from my college history classes, but yeah, they never met. They had this huge rivalry. Elizabeth even imprisoned Mary at one point, but they never actually met in person, which just seems crazy to me. The one that actually I kind of found most fascinating was the one of Adidas and Puma, who, those are shoes and fashion, etc. And it started in the 1930s as a family-run business. Then the brothers, this is simplifying it greatly, but the brothers had a falling out, and one started Adidas, one started Puma. Adidas is not supposed to be pronounced that way, but I can't remember how they said it was supposed to be pronounced. But in fact, the town where this family was is apparently so divided that if you walk in to a business wearing the wrong pair of shoes, depending on what side of the river you're on, they will tell you to go to the other side of the river and do your business there, which is just fascinating. And I had no idea. That was one I had absolutely no idea on, and found it really fascinating, especially because of the timing of it. So they started in the 1930s. The brothers were in the 1930s. Their father was before that. But with World War II, because they were in Germany, in Bavaria, just how World War II affected their relationship and their rivalry, how it then affected, they really were kind of the pioneers of athletes wearing shoes or athletic gear and promoting it. So there's some really interesting anecdotes about Jesse Owens and that Olympics in Berlin that I found fascinating, and then some other athletes throughout the decades as the story goes on. So as a history fan, I really, really enjoyed this. Again, there were some moments that took me a little bit out of, did I say it's by Scott McCormick? I don't believe I did. This book is by Scott McCormick, or the audiobook is by Scott McCormick. There were some moments that took me out of the story a little bit. As I said, the Valley Girl accent threw me off a lot. Wasn't quite sure why that was necessary. Some of those things, just as they said, Monty Python. So there's a little bit of a satirical aspect to the way the stories are told, but it makes it more interesting. And if you've ever slogged your way through certain history texts, you know that history texts can be very painful to try to read. And I was a history major in college, and I love history. I think history is fascinating, but there were some texts that were absolutely miserable to try to slog my way through. So this, I think, is a really fun way to get younger readers, or listeners in this case, interested maybe in history. And by doing it this way with the rivalries, really how history affects the greater world, because obviously I didn't know about Adidas and Puma and how it affected the sports world and how it was tied into World War II, etc. I just really found a lot of these stories fascinating. There is a second book. I think it's called Rivals 2, but let me double check because it's not popping up on my screen. Very rude. Let's see. Rivals 2, yes, it's called More Frenemies Who Changed the World. I have not yet listened to this one, but let's see who's featured in this one. Fasten your, what is that word? FAIX, I think it says. Man, I need a new prescription. I can't even read that. Fasten your knives and grab the reins of your quadriga. Rivals 2, More Frenemies Who Changed the World, is the funniest look at people who benefited the world through their hatred. Hear how the rivalry between Edison and Tesla literally changed the course of electricity, how sports fans nearly toppled the Roman Empire, how geniuses Chanel and Schiaparelli empowered women worldwide and had the greatest rivalry that wasn't, and how the feud between Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali was so intense more people tuned in to their fight than watched Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon 2 years earlier. This book has it all. Death beams, chariot races, flaming costumes, ear munchers, party fleas, and whatever the opposite of epic poetry is. No fact is too bizarre, no segue too surreal, and no sequitur is too non for this riotous sequel. Okay. If that doesn't tell you exactly how tongue-in-cheek satirical these books can be, I don't know if you're paying attention, but I'm definitely going to have to listen to this one because they are a lot of fun and I love history. So if you have a history buff in your family, or maybe you want to get someone in your family more interested in history, this might be a way to go about that. And with that, we are going to take our second break of the podcast. And when we come back, we'll be talking about some dragons. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. We are talking about books, in my case, audiobooks, because that's what I listen to in the car, for middle grade readers or for younger readers. And I said we were going to talk about dragons, specifically training dragons, and we are going to talk about the How to Train Your Dragons series, which I have finally gotten around to. I had no idea, actually, that there were as many as there are, which is very cool. Let's see. I think there are, let me double check how many there are exactly. There are 12. I just wanted to double check that so I wasn't giving you false information. I thought I remembered that there were a dozen. Let me just start by saying that the books are not really like the movies, which is typical, and I'm not going to go into how they aren't. First of all, I have only seen the first movie. I liked it. It's not that I didn't like it. I just haven't, like everything else, haven't gotten around to catching up and seeing the second two, although they are on my to-be-watched list, which is probably more extensive than my to-be-read list because I don't watch as many movies as I read books, and I'm okay with that. At any rate, if you have not heard of How to Train Your Dragon, well, you've probably heard of the movie, but maybe you didn't realize that it was also a book series. I don't know. But it is written by Cressida Cowell. Actually, she is listed as the translator, according to the book, that the original authors are the main character, Hiccup Horrendous Haddock III, to be more precise. He is the quiet and thoughtful son of the chief of the Hairy Hooligans. He tries to pass the important initiation test of his Viking clan by catching and training a dragon. Can Hiccup do it without being torn limb from limb? Join his adventures and misbehaviors as he finds a new way to train dragons and becomes a hero. This action-packed, hilarious, and perfectly illustrated novel is a modern classic beloved by millions across the globe. Now, of course, because I am listening to it on audiobook, I do not get to see the fabulous illustrations, so I am sad about that, but I always like to look on, in Amazon, you can look inside the book so you get an idea of what the illustrations look like. But this is one thing that makes me laugh is that the Vikings in the movie are mainly narrated by Scottish folk. Many of them have Scottish accents, which cracks me up because Vikings, of course, are Norwegian. I personally am both Norwegian and Scottish in ancestry, but yeah, they're two separate things. And I don't believe my grandmother would be terribly impressed if people started narrating her Norwegian ancestors with Scottish accents. But the part that I find funnier still is that these are narrated by David Tennant, and he is also Scottish. So, at least there's some specifics, or there's some interesting crossover there. David Tennant also happens to be, he's an actor, and he's done a ton of stuff. Most recently, he was in Good Omens, but he's also my favorite Doctor Who. My husband. Wow, that was a Freudian slip. My husband argues with me because he likes, if in the modern ones, he likes Matt Smith, but in the original, I don't know if you'd say original or the earlier Doctors, because there's kind of two sets of Doctors. He likes John Pertwee, and followed by Tom Baker. So anyway, that has nothing to do with anything except that David Tennant does narrate these books. David Tennant is Scottish, and still the Vikings are not Scottish. I would just like to point that out. One other thing that throws me off in these books. So they are written supposedly in the Dark Ages. There's many references to the Dark Ages, and yet Hiccup, who is supposedly writing his memoirs, and he's writing his memoirs about being a unlikely Viking hero in the Dark Ages, there's multiple references to light bulbs. And this bugs me every single time because it's the Dark Ages and there are no light bulbs. And Hiccup would not have known about light bulbs. But then later there's talk about America, which makes sense because, of course, the Vikings did most likely travel to America, but it's actually called America, which makes me laugh. I mean, that's more along the lines of things that make me laugh, but the light bulb thing just bugs me. Maybe I have issues. I know I have issues. At any rate, there are 12 How to Train Your Dragon books. I have listened to the first 4. I'm still waiting for the next set to come to me from the library. I love the library. I love that you can get audiobooks from the library. I love that you can get regular books from the library. If anyone tries to tell you that libraries are irrelevant, kick them. Don't kick them, you'll get in trouble. But, mentally kick them and then verbally tell them why libraries are still relevant and still important. At any rate, I am waiting for the next batch to come. Hiccup is an unlikely hero. He's an unlikely hero in the movie as well. He's not your typical Viking. He's certainly not like his father, and not like Gobber the Belch, who is the instructor for pirate training and Viking training and training your dragon training and all of these things. He doesn't yell. He speaks Dragonese, so he knows how to speak to dragons. He is a naturalist. He really likes to watch dragons, study dragons, etc. And so he's kind of your unlikely Viking hero, and yet he always seems to manage to figure things out. And his best friend Fishlegs is kind of even more un-Viking than he is, so they make a pretty good team. Hiccup's dragon is named Toothless, like in the movies. He's kind of he doesn't speak in the movies, right? He speaks in the books. And he's a whiny little dragon. But my favorite dragon name in the book is fish legs dragon because his name is Horror Cow. And she is really, I said his name, but her name is Horror Cow, Horror, Horror Cow. And she sleeps a lot. She's really not horrific in any way. She's very, very unhorrifying, but her name is Horror Cow. Clearly, Fish Legs was going for drama and impressive name. You know, if she's not scary, maybe she has a scary enough name that she'll be intimidating. The names again crack me up. There's Stoic the Vast, that is Hiccup's dad. There's Gobber the Belch. There is Snotface Snotlout, that is actually his name. Snotface Snotlout, yes. And he is Hiccup's main rival. He is Hiccup's cousin and thinks that he would make a better leader of the Hairy Hooligans. Anyway, that's probably way more than you wanted to know about the books, but they are a lot of fun. And one of the another one of those. It's a fantasy book. It's got dragons, those good fantasy elements in it, but also I don't want to say a bit of history because that it's not. Probably, no, it's not at all accurate of history, but, it's kind of a different time period at any rate. And I just lost my train of thought, but these books are a lot of fun. And, oh yes, I was talking about fantasy. They have the fantasy element, they have the dragons element, but they also have that element of friendship, of loyalty, of facing tasks that you don't necessarily think you are prepared for, using the gifts that you have, the skills that you have, the knowledge that you have to face situations and figure them out in ways that are helpful and productive and make you the unlikely Viking hero that you could be. So I'm very much enjoying them, and I can't wait for the next batch to come to me from the library. At any rate, it is time to wrap up this episode. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you will join me again on Tuesday for my next interview. It will be with Marlena Maduro Baraf. She is the author of a memoir, At the Narrow Waist of the World. It's a mother-daughter memoir and about her growing up in Panama and the United States. So hopefully you'll join me on Tuesday for that conversation with Marlena. In the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I hope you find time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thanks.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.